This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A very good morning to you. I hope you had a lovely weekend. That's quite an amusing story about young people not being able to do any DIY. I don't know if you've seen this. They'll pay someone to come in and change a light bulb. I unblocked a drain this weekend in the garden with a manhole cover on top of it, with big, long, bendy rods, they're called, rods. And you screw them together, about 30 foot long in the end. By the time I'd screwed them all together, I was absolutely bossing adulthood at this stage, finally, better late than never. I don't know why that sprang to mind, partly because of this story about so-called Generation Z being too scared to do anything that they'll call in the experts to change a light bulb, and partly because the kind of intellectual equivalent of that could be AI, couldn't it? You almost abnegate your responsibility to think. I've got three things written down in front of me. Your life, the world, and the problems. It could be my first three albums, couldn't they? Your life, the world, the problems. The Your Life one is something we probably should have done a little bit more often. I did say we were going to do it regularly, have sort of regular updates on the changes that were already happening in our lives as a consequence of what Tony Blair and William Hague today describe as the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history. I could write another one down there. I just say, is it the fastest? Yada 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 bing bing. The second bit, the world, is a bit more nebulous, isn't it? A bit more theoretical. I mean, what is it? Is it actually going to revolutionise the way that we do almost everything? And then the third bit is the problems, as in what we should be worried about. So there's sort of varying degrees of qualification required to contribute to these three questions, or to answer any of these three questions. You can easily join in with the differences that it's made to your life. So I was talking to Keith before we came on air, wondering out loud where it has affected me, where it has changed me, and I don't think I use it much. I'm very conscious of not being. There's a funny thing with age, is when you're faux middle-aged, when you're, I guess, in your 30s probably, and you quite like, there's an ironic slant to your middle-agedness. So you might joke about pipes and slippers. You might quite like the idea of being part of the older generation. And part of that can often be a sort of affected Ludditism, can't it? Is Ludditism the right word? Luddism? Luddite? Anyway, part of it can be a slightly confected, a slightly performative approach to new technology. Oh, I can't be doing with that newfangled business. You make jokes about your parents not being able to program the video recorder when you were a kid, if you're my age. But by the time you're in your 50s, I find, by the time you're in your 50s, I'm very conscious of not being that bloke, especially given what I do for a living, allegedly. I don't want to sort of think, right, that's it now. I can't keep up with any more technological revolutions. I struggle a bit with social media because I haven't gone all in on Instagram or Snapchat, and therefore, or TikTok, and obviously now I'm sort of feeling increasingly perturbed by Twitter, which was always my favourite. I quite like Facebook, but of course Mark Zuckerberg's decision to sort of abandon truth on that platform could also prove. But do you see what I mean? I'd have that. What would you call it? That determination not to be that bloke who sort of throws his hands up in the air and says, "Oh, I don't understand it." You can do it in this job. You can catch yourself falling into that trap because no one likes to admit on air that they don't know something or they don't really understand something. You can turn it into a funny thing. You can turn it almost into a false positive. You pretend that it's cool not to know anything. Do you see what I mean? So I don't want to be that bloke. But I am at the moment, except for the bit where I admit that I know nothing. I know nothing. So I was talking to Keith about it before we came on air, and he said, well, last time he was on holiday, you can ask AI, ask ChatGPT in this case, to just do you an itinerary for a trip around a foreign city. Tell them how long you want it to take, the kind of sites that you want to take in. Please give me all the directions. And I'm rather embarrassed to tell you, I didn't even know that. I didn't even really know that you could do that. I mean, I use the map apps and stuff, but I didn't know you could go on ChatGPT and say, could you do me a bespoke guide to the city that I'm visiting and the time that I have available, and the sort of events and the museums and the galleries that will be of most interest, or the coffee shops that will be of most interest to me. So I come at it, I hope, as a kind of tribune of the people, with the way that lots of people listening will be in quite a similar position to me. Should we say open-minded but uninformed? I quite like that. Open-minded but uninformed. I like to think most days we do the show from the open-minded and informed perspective, but on this one, open-minded but uninformed. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. So, those are your 3 areas of inquiry. The difference is that it is already made to you. I'd like to start with that. The difference is that AI have already made to your life, positive or negative. I think we've probably reached the point now where people have been put out of a job or have seen a huge downturn in their professional activity as a direct consequence of AI. I think it was photographers that gave us the first heads up, wasn't it? Who pointed to the fact that their role was becoming rapidly redundant in the area of commercial photography because everything was going to be findable. Everything was going to be at the end of a keyboard click. So that is, if you like, your starter for 10. The difference it has already made to your life, okay? 0345 6060 973. That was a good story to tell, that one, Keith, actually. People are already interested in that. Elaine wants to know what app it was that you used. Claire says, I didn't know you could do that either. And we're the same age. I've never used it. Maybe I should learn rather than just dismissing it. That's why I'm here, Claire. That's what I mean by open-minded but uninformed. And it was just ChatGPT that he used. So you just go on there and type in the parameters of what it is that you want it to give you. So I don't want that, by the way. I want, it has to be how it's affected, not just, this is quite useful, James. We may do that another day when there's not a lot of news around, but we're not doing it today, all right? We're doing the impact it's already had on your life. The first story I heard, and it was only a little thing. I don't know if you remember. I think it was a lad in Brighton, wasn't it, who had a gym. And he just got AI to do his marketing. He just, when you do that advert, that tempts people onto your site, just get you to click. And he tried to write it himself. And this is going back a year now. He tried to write it himself and it was not massively successful. And then he got ChatGPT to do it, to do the sort of, I suppose there's some form of psychological basis to it. And lo and behold, business went through the roof. The number of referrals he was getting as a consequence of his own AI-written advert was off the charts, and he was adamant that there was no earthly way he could have done that himself. So there's some interesting elements to this, and of course, every time we turn our attention to it or return our attention to it, the technology would have advanced apace, and the impacts would have become much greater. Then we move away from the personal experience into the expertise. Supercomputers and data centres. Could Britain realistically become a sort of world leader in this space? And this is where you really need to know what you're talking about. And that, as you've probably gathered, will make one of us. So is it really going to change the world in ways that we can barely grasp at this moment? Is it really the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history? So a bigger deal than the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the internet, the microprocessor, the personal computer revolution. Is it? Who can answer that? I can't answer that. I don't know that Tony Blair and William Hague present themselves immediately as world authorities on this kind of subject. I know that Blair's son has just bought an AI company, part of his, he's got an education technology company, and they've bought an AI company. That was in the news quite recently. And I know that last time I spoke to Tony Blair, I interviewed him for the programme. He was very, very big on this AI business. And there was a little bit of me that wondered if it was kind of like cool dad territory. Yeah, my son's in AI. It's going to be the future. And did he really know what he was talking about? And that is probably more a reflection of me and my cynicism than it is of Tony Blair's qualifications to tell us that this is the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history. Some of the things they come up with, obviously getting businesses to speed up routine tasks, but spotting cancer in hospital CAT scans twice as fast, facial recognition software that helps the police catch violent criminals. And that brings us to the third question, which is, what should we be worried about? I exaggerate slightly, I think, for editorial effect when I say I'm scared. Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared of the robots. But most science fiction tropes, or at least well-established science fiction tropes, do tell us to fear the technology becoming, if you like, cleverer than us, the technology reaching a point where humanity itself becomes redundant. I want you to, and this is a mixture of personal experience and expertise, the third element of this conversation, which is, are you worried? What are you worried about? What jobs will be left for human beings to do? And should we be conscious or concerned about the rise, as Isaac Asimov probably said at some point, the rise of the robots? So there's three ways into this, and there's probably more, actually, that have occurred to you but haven't occurred to me yet, but they're welcome too. There's a difference it has already made to you and your livelihood. 0345 6060973. There's the question of whether it is true. Just tell me why it is the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history. I don't mean that facetiously. I hope I don't sound ignorant. Why is it? You'd have thought that the invention of the microprocessor, or the invention of the spinning loom, or the invention of the steam engine, or they seem to me to be bigger deals at the moment. But obviously this is much more all-encompassing. Why is it the biggest, the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history? And finally, what should we be worried about? And remember, today's programme is brought to you in the spirit of open-minded ignorance. Yeah, that works. Open-minded ignorance. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are turning our attention, as we do regularly, albeit that today's impetus for doing so is a little stronger than usual, to the questions of the differences that AI is going to make to our lives and to our world, for good or for ill. Everybody welcome. But I am here in a spirit of open-minded ignorance, and I can't get away with this for much longer, can I? At some point, I'm going to have to stop being as ignorant as I am now. And it is phone-ins like this one that will, I hope, accelerate that process. John's in Croydon. John, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Basically, last week I was reading a book about the supremacy of ChatGPT and the open AI source that it is. So this piqued my interest.
Yes.
So then I started using it in the context of a plumber, because in our world we say we work with our hands, it won't be able to replace us, we're fine.
Are you a plumber?
Yes, I am.
Yes, okay.
So then with that, I've asked it to do things like, I had 3 copper pipes on a wall and a small frame, and just took a picture and said, how do I complete this boiler install next? And it gives me detailed, point by point, including legislation of what to do next, with very few identifying features. Not like, oh, well, it's all there, it's all easy to see, it's just give you the manual. And no, and then you could re-plug in more information, and it would then alter the way you do it. And even so, then I was thinking, right, design a heating system for my house with the address. It then completely did that, and I said, right, can you put it on a schematics drawing? And it then just uploaded a simple drawing from Rightmove, just to give it a general see to see how it works. And it just, next level.
How much would that have cost 10 years ago to get a human being to do it, or 5 years ago?
It's about time hours and man hours. So if you're a self-employed plumber or something like that, then you're quoting for a job, that could take you good 3-4 hours or so. Like, then you're not working or something. And if you're working for a larger firm, then you're employing someone at a greater cost to be able to do that, and so on. And like, so for example, my father's got an encyclopedic knowledge on plumbing, so any sort of questions that I would fall short on, I would then go to him for that. But this completely bypasses him.
Well, it's devaluing him, isn't it? In a way, it's rendering his expertise almost pointless.
Yeah,
whereas
exactly
previously, and to me, I'm still a bit I think that's really valuable and impressive, but it's just not anymore under your analysis.
And do you know what it is? When you're saying why is it the fastest? And
yes.
It's because basically we're putting it... So previously you'd have X plus Y equals Z, and your calculator or whatever computer you'd use would simply regurgitate that information. This one is using the information that you plug into it to then grow and expand its knowledge to then... So, for example, if 10,000 plumbers started using this throughout the day, it's going to learn at the rate of their mistakes and questions and continue to grow and expand its own knowledge. So it's going to continue to get better. We're not going to have to wait for the developers to realise the pitfalls of their ways, listen to the people who are using it, and then implement it.
How excited are you and how worried? Just tell me about your emotions, because there's the one thing AI can't do, really.
Yeah, well, for me, it's the fact that I am... Like, if you was in a house building scenario or something like that, then potentially people could see the value in building robots to replace us. But I don't think that's the case. But I think this will help in pitfalls of knowledge and bringing people who are previously unsure about certain
It's the weirdest thing philosophically, because it is an unprecedented dissemination. You know, the access to quite detailed knowledge that previously would have involved a lifetime of study and experience is now everybody's. You can get it off your phone in a nanosecond. So on one level, that's a wonderful revolutionary sign of progress. And I don't know whether this is just a bit like somebody mourning the passing of horses when the motor car was invented, and within a year everyone will feel ridiculous. But I value people like your dad. I value not. I think it's worth more than the sum of its parts.
And I see that. James, just to share an anecdote with you, I shared about this information. I was so overwhelmed, like, my God, how good this is. I shared it with a lady in a shop, and she was then discussing how she had a problem at school and that she was going to write a letter in. So I said, well, allow this to do it.
Yeah.
Another lady who had come into the shop, and she said, oh, have you heard about this? I'm going to get it to write this letter for me. The lady replied, oh, it's brilliant, I don't even think anymore, and just laughed away. And I thought, well, there's two ways to go about it.
I don't even think anymore. Wow. I used AI to write the executive summary on my application for promotion. Please don't mention my name. It worked and was written far better than I could have done in a fraction of the time. But wouldn't it write the same executive summary for everybody that asked it to do?
But you can ask it to then change that and go in and develop
specific things. So what are you worried about? What is there to be worried about?
Maybe potentially people, like, it can do anything, it's what you ask it to do. And in the current hands, it'll obviously restrict you from doing certain things. If you ask it how to make a bomb, it's obviously going to tell you that that's not applicable.
Right.
But it's then people who are able to use this software, put it into like places that they want that information. Or, do you know, if it turns out in the wrong hands, then this thing is all encompassing and will be able to...
the internet, I suppose. Who foresaw where we are now when we all started getting excited about MySpace not that long ago? Thank you, John. While you're here, I'm all right now. I think I've sorted out my incinerator, which is what I was asking plumbers about most recently. But I've got my radiators, mate, are out all over the place. Some of them are red hot.
ChatGPT, James.
No, I'm asking you. So I've bled them all, and I've opened the valves on the side that's not the thermostat to make sure they're all fully open. I fixed the one in the bathroom, actually. I was quite proud of that. I had quite a productive weekend. But why are some of my radiators scorchio and some of them are barely hot at all if they've all been bled and the pressure is fine?
Because of the balancing of the system. So water takes its easiest form. So now you've opened them all up. The ones who have got more of a demand or more of a cooling for heat will take that, and then if you was to turn those ones that are particularly hot down, then that will push it through to the ones that aren't quite particularly hot, and keep doing that until you've precariously balanced the system and never touch it again.
Oh, okay. Shall I get someone in, or shall I do that myself?
Give it a go yourself, and if you struggle, then get somebody in.
All right, you're on. Okay, I'll let you know.
You've got my number, James.
Well, there it is. I'll give you a ring later, or possibly ask ChatGPT. I like that because straight away, Alan thinks that this is just Dad stepping in to make sure his little boy is well looked after. Mate, if Tony Blair and William Hague and the whole world were only pretending that AI is going to be a massive revolution, because Ewan Blair, Tony Blair's son, has got a company that matches employers with young talent and uses AI to do so, then you'd have a point. But if you honestly... John's a bloody plumber. He's just described to you the world-changing impacts of this technology that he has. I'm all for a bit of cynicism, But if you honestly think that William Hague is pretending to believe that AI is the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history so that you and Blair's headhunting company can somehow make some more money or build some more business, then you really, really, really need to give your head a wobble. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. Mark is in Chorley Wood. Mark, what's going on?
Yes, good morning, Brian. How you doing?
Very well, Bert.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
Right, AI. Yes, we're all worried about it. Obviously, where is it going to take us? But I run a lost and missing stolen dog group called loststolendog.com, and we launched a free app 2 months ago to every dog owner in the UK and Ireland. And we felt that we had to keep up with technology. We had to introduce AI within the app. And what we have done is that if somebody...
I must have missed the bit where I said ring in and give yourself a free advert. Is this a commercial enterprise, or is it done entirely from the goodness of your own heart, Mark?
It's goodness of the own
heart. Then you can carry on. So what does AI do?
Years, yeah?
What does AI do that you couldn't do previously?
Right. When it's a real-time alert system if your dog is stolen or goes missing. People panic when their dog's gone missing. They might not have a photo of their dog on them, but they know they know the breed of the dog.
Yeah.
So the alert goes out, red setter missing, etc., 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 and we automatically put the app automatically uses AI to put a picture of a red setter on there. Also, if a dog
but you could have just used Google Images for that, couldn't you?
It's not quick enough.
Well, it's
not
pretty
quick enough. Yeah, but
give me a picture of a red setter.
But the app needs...
it does it all immediately. Okay, well, good luck with it. I mean, powerful business, important business, very traumatic to lose a dog. And I'm sure it is, maybe not at the vanguard of the fastest scientific and technological revolution in human history, but if your dog's missing, it'll feel like the most important thing in the world. 10:27 is the time. AJ is in Harrow. AJ, what's going on?
Hi, James. How you doing? Basically, I'm a massive proponent of AI and
What does that
ChatGPT.
mean? What does that mean?
Well, it saves me, a lot of time, and it gives me answers that sometimes I can't find anywhere else. So, for example, I trained my ChatGPT. I've got the Pro version to read books, so you can actually put web links in. It will scan the web links and read the pages, or you can actually upload PDFs. So I had let's say a legal issue where a company owed me £14,000.
Right. In
writing, they said that they would refund me and dragged the issue 2 years, ignored solicitors. And I got to the point where, I've got to file small claims court, but the law changed, which means any claims over 10,000 goes to the High Court. So I'm like, oh my God, it's a different ballgame.
Yes.
It involves barristers. So I PDF, turned the small claims book into a PDF and the high claims court book into PDF. Trained ChatGPT to read the entire book for me.
Right.
Because I didn't have the time and the patience for it. I'm running a company. And I asked it to form the legal basis of my argument, including which law I was bringing the action under.
Wow.
Which turned out to be the UK Consumer Goods and Services Act 1982.
Yes.
And it told me that when I go to court, I need to prove that the company did three things or didn't do three things, which was act with reasonable care, act with reasonable skill, and provide the service in a reasonable time. Which, in my argument, they haven't. It's been 4 or 5 years. They haven't resolved the issue. So
you haven't been to court yet?
No, it's filed. They filed a defence. I should be going to High Court sometime this year. I think it's around 10 or 11 months the waiting time.
And you're going to go? Are you going to represent yourself?
Well, this is the thing. I've tried to find a barrister. I probably emailed around 20 barristers. The London Assembly, a few London Assembly mayors are involved, and they're trying to help because it is a kind of governmental issue. But I can't find a barrister who wants to do it. As soon as I say who the defendant is, they just don't reply. They're quite big.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in what happens next. I don't want to get bogged down in the detail, the complications, because we do that on another day. I'm interested in the AI angle on this. But the idea of you getting a compelling case put together by AI, which would once have required a solicitor with training and knowledge, is exactly what I points to the speed of this revolution and the importance. But if you do end up in court, I'd love to know how you get on. So keep in touch, AJ. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 10. I was sort of steering you a bit. I don't know whether I'd have done a better job if I'd deployed AI. But the mixture of topics today, all under the AI umbrella. What we haven't got really is an insight into why it is the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history. So fascinated, I remain fascinated in the immediate impacts, the real world applications, of which more shortly, but also why is it the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history? And of course, maybe you think it isn't. When we first started doing this, when was it, 2-3 years ago? Not that long ago. And there would be a couple of callers just cautiously suggesting that we probably shouldn't bet the house on this technology just yet, or that it wasn't going to be quite as far-reaching and impactful as some experts suggested. I think those voices have been quietened now. Unless, of course, I'm describing you just haven't rung in yet. But the idea that this is not a major revolution, human revolution, seems to me to be going largely unchallenged. I still want to know more. 10:34 is the time. Tiago's in Bristol. Tiago, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I use it all the time, and the reason I am so enthusiastic about it is I genuinely believe it has the power to unleash a lot of human potential. I'm most likely neurodivergent. I don't have a diagnostic. I have traces of things that look clear like ADHD, and
Sure.
my head is constantly a lot of noise.
Yes.
And I have a job that requires me to understand different things very quickly and act on them, and has helped me so much just to put all the noise, everything that's in my head, rather than writing a 10-page email. It helps me filter through and put information forward to my colleagues on what's important. I feel now able to achieve so much more, and I think that across the board in different areas that can solve the so-called productivity problem that we have in this country that I can stop hearing about. And I fear it may cause mass joblessness as well, because in the wrong hands, this is just a way to get rid of people too.
Not even the wrong hands. I mean, why wouldn't you? And that means that all will be left eventually. It'll be forms of manual labour or customer-facing work that the customer prefers the human touch. Could it do this? How long before it's doing radio shows? I bet they're already doing music shows with AI presenters.
Nothing can replace you, James.
Well, you're very kind, but sadly, that's not true. I mean, even Suella Braverman can replace me, albeit temporarily. The question of how long it will be before my introduction would be better if I asked AI to do it, and you might, and they could do my voice. What jobs are going to be left?
Well, I like to think on the optimistic side and think that will unlock humans to do things that we actually enjoy, like creating art and things that give us joy, rather than just work for money. I do think that I can unlock a post-currency world if the things go right. Very Star Trek-like, and I know it might sound silly, but I think AI is the key to that. It's the key to removing our need for, labor as it exists, and allows us then to do what human connection requires to do, and perhaps thrive that way. But I'm ever the optimist.
No, well, I suppose you have to be in this kind of space, and I like your description of neurodivergence in a way that makes the advantages of AI pretty clear. On a very personal level, the article in the Times today, which you should probably read, by William Hague and Tony Blair, has example after example after example of the applications that it is going to have in the wider world on business. Autonomous vehicles being part of it, the various executives in that world. So that drivers cease to be needed. That I think is probably the big shadow, isn't it? Is the encroaching redundance. And if you look at people like Elon Musk, and indeed much of Donald Trump's entire administration, the idea that we can be confident or optimistic, to use Tiago's self-description, that whoever is in power will ensure that even if we no longer need to work, we will be happy and comfortable, as opposed to rebalancing the world so that a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of people have, turning it into a form of Hunger Games. If you're not in Panem, then you're toast. Which is quite a good pun, actually, Latin fans, but I won't bother explaining it to you. So that is a worry. That the idea that the people who are not in possession of all the goods will somehow be okay, even when they can no longer work in return for goods, is probably naive. That's getting a bit philosophical, getting a bit dystopian. And I think dystopia is not far away from this conversation. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. Mark's in Billericay. Mark, what do you reckon?
What do I reckon? I reckon that sometimes the bigger question to ask is whether we know what we want as people. So, for example, I was just doing the prep call with your assistant prior to this. Here's a question for all of your listeners. If you had £1 to spend on, say, marketing, and you wanted to earn the most amount of money, and you could choose between earning £5 back or £10 back, which one would you choose?
Well, I mean, in the absence of questions about what is it going to be ethically and what is it going to do, most people obviously are going to say £10.
Exactly. And that is a really familiar problem that I'm used to. And many people who use ChatGPT or these AI systems will be aware that sometimes what seems really straightforward can actually be really counterproductive. So I think about the caller whose plumber's dad, had lots of experience, or drivers or carpenters or whatever you do. In my job, we use these systems every day, AI systems, and I wouldn't be scared of them because everyone in the world would say, well, I would like to have £10 per pound spent. I would like to maximize the return on my ad spend. So in this little example, which is reflective of many problems with AI, you might have a very, very small population where you can market to effectively at 10 times the return, but a huge population that you can market to at 5 times the return, meaning there's a massive, massive opportunity if you reduce that scale of return. And I say that, James, really to land the point of saying that these tools can be horrendously wrong if not guided correctly by people who have the ability to communicate well, understand business goals, understand what clients are wanting. And AI is nothing more than a tool to increase the efficacy rate of those people. That's
something that humans can use. So, video didn't kill the radio star and various other technological developments that were supposed to, seeing us all putting our feet up at some point in the not too distant future, is not going to come to pass, are you saying? But what about all the jobs that it will just do? So even though it is being operated by a talented, educated human, it is also doing lots and lots of things that would previously have been done by other humans.
Yeah, well, that brings to mind your earlier point about the horse and carriage drivers, for example. I believe that humans have an inherent desire to increase their knowledge and skill base. I think that will continue. And I think my advice, using these systems every day and being very familiar with them is if there's anyone listening right now who feels a little bit worried or concerned about AI, is jump into it, have a go at it, use it for things that you might find useful, and try not to have maybe like an instant negative opinion of it. And you might find.
But that's what I mean by open-minded ignorance. Is that there's no shame in not knowing much, but if you use your shame about being ignorant to close down the chance of illumination or learning more, then you're on a hiding to nothing. The speed. Why is it the fastest technological and scientific revolution in human history?
I think if I look at my example, I specialize in online marketing as a good example, and it has honestly revolutionized my business and my capabilities. So if that is the truth for me, that would be true for millions of people around the world. So then if you have a technology that practically overnight transforms a business to being much more successful, it's not a surprise that it's one of the fastest growing technologies.
Yeah, no, I because of the sort of snowballing effect, if you like. The more it's used, the bigger it gets. The bigger it gets, the more it's used. I'm fiercely concerned about. Thank you, Mark. This is from David. I use this technology every day, and I'm immensely happy that it helps me to do my job much quicker. I'm also fiercely concerned about the future. Please pursue your dystopian angle, because if you look at the people who control these AI resources and how they're behaving with regards to a dictatorial president, just imagine how they'll behave when their own financial survival is on the line. I don't know when you sent that, 10:42. No, I had just nodded towards that a moment before you wrote your message. Maybe our minds were arriving at the same place at the same time. How democratic can it be? How democratic Can it be safeguarded? A lot of this technology is currently very, very freely available. You can pay a premium to have faster, better operators, but the basic technology is available to anyone with an internet connection. How long will that be sustained? I don't know, because who will be the gatekeepers, if you like? And that might be a question that belies my ignorance on this subject. There you go. You wait ages for a call from Billericay, and then you get two along at the same time. Phil is also in Billericay. Phil, what made you pick up the phone?
Morning, James. Nice to talk to you.
You don't know Mark, do you?
I don't actually.
No,
Maybe we should
now.
get together at some point.
That.
Yeah.
We can have a JOB pint. Anyway, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah. I'm an internet consultant. I retired about 3 or 4 years ago.
Just stop for a minute. Stop for a minute. I just want to reflect on what that says about our. All right, who'd have thought that an internet consultant could have retired already? When I was on the Daily Express at the beginning of my career, we didn't even have an internet connection on the office of a national newspaper, sort of 28, 26, 27 years ago. And you've already, an internet consultant who's already retired. That feels to me like a moment of social change. But I digress. Carry on.
But when I discovered AI, I went back to work. So AI for me has given me a completely new job. And in the last couple of years, I've taught thousands of people how to use different AI technologies. I think one of the important things to bear in mind here is that AI is not a thing. It's not a thing in the same way that the internet is not a thing.
Yeah.
So you've got ChatGPT, you've got generative pre-trained transformers. That's what the GPT bit stands for. You were mentioning earlier about podcasts. You can go to Google's new notebook.
I've just seen this. I've just seen this. This is mad. Where you can. You tell us what you can do there.
Basically, you can take a document that you've got, whether it's a report that you've written, or a book, or anything that you've written. You can feed it into Google's LLM, and what it will then do with the data that you've given it, it will create an FAQ for you. It will create a timeline. It will create a summary, and it will create
a conversation, a podcast where two AI voices are discussing your document.
Exactly, and you can go in and you can edit that and make it say exactly what you want it to do.
I just wonder how many minds are blown at this point in the conversation. How many people who, I like the phrase informed, open-minded ignorance, people who are not closed-minded, they're aware of how little they know, how important it is to know more, and then lo and behold, you've just learned that you can upload a document, whether you wrote it or not. Two AI voices will have a chat about its content in a mini podcast that you can then edit yourself.
That's right. What I can also do,
go on.
I can go to another tool and I can create a video for myself talking about whatever I want to. I can then get that translated into, say, Japanese. My voice will be cloned so it sounds as though I'm speaking Japanese. And it will sync my lips so it looks like I'm actually pronouncing Japanese words.
And that's just going to get better and better and better in terms of...
It's already exceptionally good.
Not glitchy at all. You're just a Japanese person watching it would think you were speaking fluent Japanese.
Exactly that, yeah. If I go to something like ChatGPT, I can take a photograph of what I've got in my fridge, or I could take a photograph of my drinks cabinet and then say to something like ChatGPT, what drinks can I make out of this? Or what can I have for supper based on what you've seen that I've got in my fridge? So you're having conversations all of the time with these tools. If I'm in the woods, I can go to the mobile version of ChatGPT. I can take a photograph of a tree and I can say, what tree is this? And ChatGPT might come back and say, it's not a very good picture. Can you get me a picture of the leaves or the bark? So I can do that. And then it will say, okay, well, that's what this particular tree is. So we're having a conversation. The way in which search works on the internet is going to change completely because people don't want to search. They want to find an answer.
Yes.
So there's a whole new breed of AI search engines like Perplexity that will do that for you. So you ask the question, and instead of the old traditional way in which Google gives you lots of web pages that you've then got to go and look at, what an AI search engine will do is it will look at the pages that it's found on the web, and it will then go through those, and it will give you a summary. And the important point is it gives you the answer that you want. You don't have to start faffing around going to different web pages to get the information. It's all
What are you worried about, Phil?
Down for you. I think the thing that I'm most worried about is the potential for misuse, for misinformation. It would be really easy. I could do it now, basically, to take a video of you and have you saying exactly what I wanted you to say.
I think that has happened, actually. I saw a couple of things.
It has.
It's one of the reasons
it happened with Martin Lewis, for example.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, I don't know whether it's because it's what I do for a living that I'm less. I think that somehow there'll be a arbiter on that kind of thing. There'll be something that can confirm or deny that it's true. But there's another story.
No, I'm sorry, James. There absolutely won't be.
Because the minute you come up with something, it'll overtake itself.
Exactly. I mean, we can see that already at the moment. If you ask ChatGPT to write something for you, and to answer the question you had earlier, is it going to be the same every time? No, it's not, because ChatGPT has not even that. It will take a sort of like a random nature to the way in which it answers the question.
Oh, okay.
So
good Lord.
It doesn't always choose exactly the same words to answer your question.
Well, let me read you something. Actually, I'm late for the break, so I'll read it to everybody, and we can all reflect upon it. The entire first hour of this programme is horrifying and dystopian, says Mart. AI is the death of creativity, originality, human connection, hard work, and real content. A generation of people doing nothing, having no experiences, reading nothing, disconnected from the human experience, which seems a little bleak. But there's an echo there of the first caller, John in Croydon, and the woman he met who uses it a lot and says, I don't even have to think anymore, as if that was a good thing. Although, of course, John Keats did once write how much he would prefer a life of sensation rather than of thought. So, oh, crikey, I don't know. But you can see where some of these concerns come from.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:53. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Manjit knows where I'm coming from, and this is coming from Wanstead. Anyone calling you who starts their call with the words "I use AI all the time" today is missing the point. They're not quite, Manjit. There are several points, some of which they may be missing, and some of which they may be hitting squarely on the head. But it's what you write next that gives me pause. This is all about the future. The big problem with AI is the speed at which it will remove jobs from the general public. Have we had a call yet from anyone who's lost their job as a consequence of AI? Why not? Have I asked the wrong question, or is it not happening yet? Or are you still licking your wounds? Or you're down the job centre trying to find a new one? That's a bit analogue. Has anyone lost their job yet as a consequence of AI? Is AI now doing your job? Because I think it's going to happen. I don't see how you stop it, or indeed why anybody would want to. It will remove jobs from the general public. Of course, we can worry about misuse and the rest of it, but taking a company's workforce from 300 employees to 30 overnight will be the big battle, as this will happen everywhere from taxi drivers to law firms. I just think you let yourself think about some of the ramifications, and it's one of those things. It's like being in a lift with mirrors. I don't know why I always think of this at moments like this, but if you're in a lift and it's surrounded with mirrors, then your reflection is reflected infinitely. It goes on forever. You see the reflection of a reflection. You only need two mirrors to get a grasp of infinity. The closest you can get to infinity is two mirrors reflecting each other. And as soon as you start thinking about this stuff, it begins to feel a bit like that to me. So I'm thinking about everything from what gives humanity its value. Historically, the ability to retain information, to understand things, to process knowledge. You think of all the great names from the past, the great philosophers, the great writers, the great artists, what they had in common, whether it's Da Vinci or Shakespeare, was a brain that could live in the same world that everybody else was living in and find things that nobody else could find. Does that cease to be of value? Do we recalibrate the whole of human value, all of the things that make you valuable, whether it's John's dad with an encyclopedic knowledge of plumbing, or whether it is somebody who I don't know, nuclear fission, somebody who's like Oppenheimer. That ceases to matter, except the new stuff. I don't know. Does it come up with new stuff, or does it just have absolutely expert grasp of everything that's gone before? William is in Alloa. William, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I'm not sure if it's too late, but I just want to say I hope you have a happy, healthy and prosperous 2025.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Same to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I think this is a really fascinating conversation. I feel it's something that unites us as humanity. I don't hear anything divisive today, and I think this is a great way of looking at it, these three dimensions: your life, the world, and the problems. And for me, in terms of my life, and I think you were asking, why is this the fastest technological and scientific discovery? For me, it's because it's a multiplier and an equalizer. So whatever your knowledge is, or wherever you're at with your specialism, it allows you to multiply that. And I think the reason why the traditional left are the ones that are pushing the adoption of artificial intelligence is because it's an equalizer. And one of the maxims of
where did we get that from? I know we mentioned Tony Blair today, but his co-author is William Hague. So where does the left come? Where are you getting that from?
Well, that's just my interpretation.
Oh, okay.
I may be wrong, but
fair enough.
For me, it's Labour. It's coming from Labour. Conservatives were in power. They talked about it, but they didn't really do anything. And it's Labour that are spearheading it, as far as I see it.
Well, you know what? I feel bad now, because you said this was a lovely conversation with no divisiveness, and I'm about to have an argument with you. But Rishi Sunak was all over this as well. If Rishi Sunak had stayed Prime Minister, I think that the future would look quite similar on this field, on this one front.
Yeah, you may be right, but I just feel like Labour are doing it. They're just talking about it.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So, and I mean, this I think will disrupt our world. I mean, it's disrupted us as individuals, and for me as an individual, it's really helped me, James, because I get a lot of emails from people where they're projecting, they're deflecting, they're in their ego.
Yes.
And you know what it's like when someone sends you an email, and if someone says something bad to you in real life, you've got that tone. You can't always hear the tone in an email, and sometimes I want to respond and tell them what day of the week it is. But if I'll go to AI and I'll say, this person is sending me an email, they're giving me attitude, how can I best respond? And more often than not, I get a really good response. And I'm actually at the point, James, where I actually have conversations with AI, not just behind my keyboard, but, voice. So I'll have it running in the background, and it is like a real assistant there. So it's been absolutely incredible. And I think in terms of where we're at, I think this conversation that you're having, it's amazing, because we have to always ask, when we have a convenience, what are we losing? And that's what I really love about your show, because it's one of the consistent themes.
What do you think we are losing here?
I think we are potentially losing our creativity. So if you look at other conveniences, like supermarkets. The supermarkets means that we lose bargaining, because we used to go to the greengrocer, we used to go to the fishmonger, we used to go to markets, and that we used to have a relationship with that person. And when the supermarket came, we lost that. So with AI, we're becoming less human. So it's taking our creativity, but we're losing our humanity to a certain extent. And I feel we have to make sure that we're also growing spiritually and not just technologically, James.
Well, that's where I get my optimism from, in that humanity generally has accommodated all of these epic advances. The printing press, I suppose, would be a fairly huge one. People were terrified back in the day of what would happen if plebs were able to read the Bible themselves in English instead of just having it confined to pulpits in churches, computers, internet, and humanity generally absorbs and advances. And I don't know what this conversation will sound like in 20 years' time, but we will know the answers to a lot of the questions that have been thrown up. Thank you, William. And just in case you weren't already worried about this, Corpsey's been in touch with an article from The Atlantic, I think last year, looking at the 183,000 books that have been used to train the machines. And just in case you weren't already worried enough about this, you'll never guess who wrote one of them.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Okay, I wasn't expecting this to happen. Since my article appeared, writes this journalist, I'll share the article on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I use these days, but you can find it yourself. It's published by The Atlantic, and it is under the title, "These 183,000 books are fueling the biggest fight in publishing and tech." It is by a writer called Alex Reisner, Reisner, and it was published in September of 2023. And I managed to completely miss it. Since my article appeared, writes Alex Reisner, I've heard from several authors wanting to know if their work is in Books 3, which is a database of 191,000 books that he established had been used without permission to train generative AI systems by Meta, Bloomberg, and others. Pirated ebooks, most of them, published in the last 20 years. Since my article appeared, I've heard from several authors wanting to know if their work is in Books 3. In almost all cases, the answer has been yes. These authors, and this is the crucial bit, because one of my books is in there. I had no idea. These authors spent years thinking, researching, imagining, and writing, and had no idea that their books were being used to train machines that could one day replace them. You see what I said about the mirrors in the lift, right? Am I conveying now that sense of as soon as you start thinking about this stuff, the possibilities run off over the horizon at 10 million miles an hour? So being used to train machines that could one day replace them. Meanwhile, the people building and training these machines stand to profit enormously. And I'll just share that article now, because we move next to territory that is in many ways the polar opposite of what we've just been discussing, the interplay between the human experience and the technological frontiers being pushed ever further. It is a million miles away from the most human of experiences. It's visceral, isn't it? The human treating another human medically. The hospital, admittedly, there'll be technology involved, but fundamentally, the body of a human being needs to be accommodated in a physical space so that treatment can be administered, whether it's by robots or whether it's by other human beings. That physical space is absolutely essential. And we return to territory that we've explored before, but we haven't quite explored it from this perspective because it hasn't quite happened like this before. They are now advertising for registered nurses willing to work on literally corridor care. One North London hospital, but I suspect it's probably more widespread, is recruiting nurses specifically to work 12-hour shifts in its corridors. Director of the Royal College of Nursing in England has said that corridor care should occur only in very, very exceptional circumstances, but instead has become common, particularly as A&E departments become overwhelmed by flu and other viruses. I don't have a particularly sophisticated way into this story. I don't think we should use one either. I certainly won't be deploying AI or ChatGPT to come up with a killer question. You know what the favourite question ever on this programme is? I haven't explained why for a while, have I? The what was it like theory, which goes back to my school days. I can't help feeling that this has got echoes of the AI conversation in it as well. So I went to the kind of school where on Wednesday afternoons, sometimes some old duffer who'd been up the Zambezi would come in with a slide projector and show us slides and pictures of his expedition up the Zambezi. And he'd be sort of an ex-military or a self-styled explorer. It was a different era, this. It would be the early 1980s. And it was usually quite dull. It was often quite dull. We'd be sitting cross-legged on the floor in the gym, and the fella would be up the front, sort of intoning a lecture that he'd probably given 30 times already that year, and sharing his slides and maybe passing something around the room, like some sort of artifact. And they'd talk about, the trip, and then at the end we'd ask questions. And we rarely had very many questions to ask. It depends on who was doing the lecture and how interesting it was. But we'd be sitting there. And, of course, if there weren't any questions, we got out quicker. So most of us didn't put our hands up, even if we had a question. We could get back outside, start playing cricket or football again. But one lad, he was a really lovely lad, and he stuck his hand up. And the headmaster ignored him because he wasn't renowned for his academic prowess, shall we say. And the headmaster ignored him. So there's only one kid. So there's 140 kids sitting cross-legged in the gym. One kid has got his hand up, and the headmaster is pretending that he can't see him because he knows or he believes that the question will be a bit of a disaster. And we're all giggling like nobody's business. And then the explorer or whatever he was says, well, there's a question there. I just asked that. Yeah. So the headmaster goes, oh, all right then. I can still remember the lad's name, but I've never said it on air. It wouldn't be fair. So he's got his hand out. And remember, this fella's just done about 45 minutes to an hour telling us exactly what happened when he went up the Zambezi in a canoe. I made that bit up. I can't remember what it was, but it was something like that. And he's the only one there with his hand in the air. And he just says, "What was it like? What was it like?" And we all started giggling and thought we were all so much cleverer than him, and teased him about it for years afterwards, because he'd spent an hour telling us what it was like, except he hadn't. He hadn't told us what it was like. He told us what he did. They're two very different things, and yet at the time I didn't realise. It was only after I recalled the story here and reflected on it that I realised it wasn't a stupid question at all. In many ways, it was the perfect question. And I have now essentially made a living out of asking you, what was it like? What was it like? That's essentially what I do. Most days, at least one topic, sometimes all three, will be a variation on the theme that is established by, what was it like? What was it like? And that's what we're doing now. What's it like? Because there are two or three perspectives on this. I can think of three immediately: the patient, the healthcare worker, the nurse, the doctor, and the family member. To be in a corridor, on a bed in a corridor, and knowing that you're staying there. It's not a sort of temporary holding pattern. You are going to be treated in a corridor. Now, at first glance, you would say that is absolutely terrible. And it obviously is, but it's a hell of a lot better than not being in the hospital at all, isn't it? Well, I presume it is. Where would you rather be? No treatment at all, or treated on a bed in a corridor in a hospital? Yeah, I thought so. You'd rather be on a bed in a corridor. 518,000 trolley waits of 12 hours or more in the last year, according to some Liberal Democrat analysis. You don't need me to remind you that this is all traceable back to so-called austerity and various different policies introduced by various different Tory governments. The patient satisfaction in the NHS in 2010, when David Cameron became Prime Minister, was the highest it had ever been before or after. So we know that the epic changes in the NHS are consequences, usually, or largely, are consequences of political decisions. But we also know that people dying in chairs as the NHS normalises care in corridors, which is the headline in the Times today, is not something that can be either ignored or dismissed. 54,000 patients across England alone waited for more than 12 hours on trolleys to be admitted to a ward last month. So you do get into a ward sometimes. The ambulance delays outside hospitals have never been longer. 20,000 teams waiting for over an hour to hand patients over. So this is logjam central. This is like a constipated medical system, because departments with the capacity to see 10 patients have now got 15, 20, 40 people in them, according to the director of the Royal College of Nursing. But I don't know what it's like. I don't know what difference it makes. And that's what I want you to tell me. I think of my mum, because she is the person I have visited most in a hospital. And, you know, it's not that long ago that we were very worried about mixed wards. And we felt that was an infringement of dignity, particularly for women. Mixed wards would be a luxury if the alternative was being in a corridor. Would it? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But the psychic toll, it's a phrase I love. And by it, I mean the things that are draining you and exhausting you that you're not necessarily noticing. So it's not like you've just run up and down stairs, or it's not like you've had a really bad night's sleep. The things that you know have exhausted you. You've just put in a really long shift. But the psychic toll of some things is really hard to measure. I think back to the caller Tiago describing his neurodivergence and the exhaustive nature, the exhausting nature of having a brain that never stops, you know, that's always firing off on all cylinders. But all of us suffer psychic tolls that we're not necessarily aware of. Is the stress and the strain of being in hospital worse when you are in a corridor? 0345 60 60973. If you're a doctor or a nurse, how does having patients in corridors affect your job, affect your ability to do your job, affect how you feel about doing your job. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. And then when you have a loved one in a corridor, I don't think I need to ask you a particularly complicated question, do I? I just want to know what it's like for them and for you. Because this is now normalised. This has come to the point where I can say to you and mean it, this is so commonplace now that I think we need to remind ourselves that being treated in a corridor is better than not being treated at all. What, question number one, is it like to be there? How does it affect your hospital experience when you're in a corridor, not a ward? All right, 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. Question number two, if you are a healthcare professional, if you work in a hospital, how does it affect your professional experience to be treating patients who are in corridors, not wards? 0345 60 60 973. And then the one that I think we're probably going to relate to more than anything else, because most of us are neither doctors nor patients, when you're visiting someone you love, someone you care for, and you, I mean, it can't quite get your head around it. You've read about it. I've heard James talking about it on the radio. I knew this was a thing, but my mum's in the corridor. When's she gonna? Talk me through that experience as well. 0345 60 60 973. Well, while we're on the subject, actually, I'd just like to put a shout out for the A&E staff at West Middlesex Hospital in London, who came to our helped us out enormously over the Christmas period, not for the first time, so big thanks to them. And to the audiology, I bet no one ever in the history of British radio has ever given a shout out to the audiology department at Kidderminster Hospital, who managed to repair and return my mother's hearing aid in, I mean, frankly, I couldn't even believe it had arrived. I dropped it in the post in London on Saturday, and I think someone on their way home from work popped it through her letterbox at home in Kidderminster on the Monday afternoon. Absolutely extraordinary service from the audiology department at Kidderminster Hospital. And I mention those two personal connections because I do worry now that almost all of the conversations we have about NHS are coming from an apocalyptic, catastrophic perspective. And actually, the people working there day in, day out are doing God's work. They are doing amazing work and doing the very best they can in horrific and horrible circumstances. And I always think that business of clapping on our front doorsteps every Tuesday evening or every Thursday evening during lockdown felt so powerful at the time because we were so weirdly isolated and lonely. But in retrospect, the further we get from those moments, the more I think how pathetic it was. That's probably the only thing we've ever done in our lives to properly demonstrate gratitude to people who are doing these jobs all the time, all year round, regardless of coronaviruses and pandemics, lockdowns and health outbreaks. It is their daily experience. So while we get exercised by the normalisation of care in corridors, these are working conditions that have been normalised for working people. And a thought for them, a thought for you, seems long overdue. 0345 60 60 973. I missed that, but well done for spotting it. A shout out to the audiology department, writes David. I couldn't believe my ears.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 11. I wrote this to you last week, says Dan. I am an A&E consultant. We've been publishing data showing that prolonged waits increase mortality for years now, but people don't care unless it directly affects them or their family. We've normalised care, back of the ambulances, corridors, etc., that would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago. It's the boiling frog analogy again. That's from Dr. Dan, the A&E consultant for the last 20 years, and thankfully, quotes only, end quotes, 8 years away from retirement. Idiot's Corner, anybody? Should we do an Idiot's Corner? Yeah, okay. What a shock. Privileged celebrity gets privileged, this is from Ed, gets privileged treatment from local NHS, and yet O'Brien wonders why people label him a champagne socialist. Mate, what do you think I did? Put a signed postcard in the envelope with my mum's hearing aid. I sometimes marvel at the places that people's brains go to. Nobody in Kidderminster has got the first idea who I am, you wombat. Well, maybe not quite nobody, but the idea that my mum gets preferential treatment with her hearing aid because her son's on the radio. Well, listen, if I was as important as you think I am, Ed, I'd be delighted. 22 after 11 is the time. Nadia is in Islington. Nadia, what would you like to say?
So I'm a physician associate working in a northwest London hospital. It's quite a busy hospital. It's quite a big hospital. And we do have a lot of patients in the corridor on a day-to-day basis. It's really hard to...
All year round? Is it all year round, Nadia?
Yes, okay. All year round. It's not just the winter.
No.
It's really hard to keep patients' dignity because you want to examine them, you want to see them, but you don't have space. You try and look for a space to see them, but you're kind of stuck because you want to see them in a timely manner. You want to see them and make sure they're okay and make sure they're receiving the treatment that they need to receive. But you also want to make sure you're giving them the dignity that they deserve and they're in a private space.
But they're not.
But yeah, exactly.
So what can you do? Not. What do you do? Can you use curtains or do you just wheel them around until you find a quiet corner? I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
I just don't know what you do.
We have plastic barriers that we use in the corridor. We have one room on the side that we use. That also nurses try and use it to change patients when they've soiled themselves. So you've got long waits for that room. It's not always the staffing because sometimes we have the staffing and the wait is not that long, but the space is what we don't have. There's loads of A&Es that have been closed recently, like over the last few years, and so all of that overspill come to us, and so there's literally no space in the hospital because there's no discharges, so patients stay.
And that's the social care quest. This is a pincer movement, isn't it? Is that you've got people coming in from one end and you've got a sort of cork in the bottle at the other end because social care, and we've talked about this a lot on the programme, is in such a mess that people who shouldn't be in hospital have got nowhere else to go.
Exactly. And there's people who come in for very minor stuff who also block the system as well.
Yes.
Things like flus and colds. They're things that you can treat at home, but people
I saw that in A&E this Christmas. Actually, I saw a nurse quite frustrated with someone who'd obviously brought their son in 2 or 3 times, despite the fact that he had flu, and it wasn't going to get better, and there was no magical potion that they could give him. He was going to feel rubbish for another couple of days, and then he was going to feel fine again. But they were in and out of A&E like a fiddler's elbow. That's frustrating. There's a lot going on. What in terms of you? I mean, you've got to be quite thick-skinned in your line of work, but you presumably, with each passing day, you care a little bit less about the dignity because it's not something you can provide. I've chosen my words poorly. You still care, but you appreciate there's nothing you can do in that field.
There is times where you're just like, well, I can't do anything to help. So you try the next best solution. You try so you're consciously not doing the job you would like to do. You know that you're providing the suboptimal scenario, which isn't really what you went into it for. Exactly. You try and give the best that you can in the circumstances that you have. That's beautifully put, Nadia. Thank you. And Cal knows exactly what you're talking about. I've been frontline ambulance service for 20 years. Sitting in a queue outside A&E in my ambulance for 9 or 10 hours every day is destroying my soul. I joined the ambulance service to help people. I don't feel that I am helping people anymore. It has happened before. Leslie's been in touch to tell me her father was on a trolley for 14 hours in 1983, but that would have been exceptional. That is the point. These are
experiences that medical professionals tell us, whether they're in ambulances or whether they're on wards, were not commonplace. That's why the use of the word normalise is in the headline, Leslie, the director of the Royal College of Nursing, saying that in very, very exceptional circumstances, corridor care would happen, and that would be true in 1983. But the fact that it has now become commonplace, because A&E departments were overwhelmed, that is what normalising means, and it's shocking. 27 after 11 is the time. Angela, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so it's actually coming from, the other side of it, hearing the hospital workers. So I've got two elderly parents nearly in their 90s, and unfortunately this year alone, well, not this year, last year, I've ended up in A&E with them in corridors on 3 separate instances at a very big teaching hospital in northeast London. And it's been just quite the ordeal. I think it's a very stressful environment anyway when you're going in via an ambulance. On one occasion, the ambulance couldn't offload because there was no space. Right. Another instance...
So you stayed in, were you with your parent in the ambulance?
I was with my parents, yes.
And how long were you in the ambulance for?
A couple of hours, because they couldn't... And the ambulance people, and as you hear on your show, all of the people are trying to do their best in a very bad situation.
It's driving them potty as well, isn't it?
It's driving them potty. They're lovely people, and they just couldn't discharge, in this case, my father, because there was no space. Yeah. And then ultimately we were in the ambulance for about 2 hours, and then we ended up on the outside doors, not even in the corridor, so outside of the corridor, if you imagine, between 2 sets of double doors. And it's been quite an ordeal. But I wanted to also share the other side of it.
Yes,
I'm talking about my elderly parents. So I was with them on all occasions. My sister was with them on one occasion, my brother. So we were there to support in this quite traumatic experience for over 12 hours, sometimes 6 hours, sometimes 18 hours. So this is a frequent occurrence in this hospital. It's well known.
Right.
But what I wanted to share was, you imagine A&E, there's a lot of elderly people that are sitting in this corridor. And so I was there with my parents, but most of these people, I would say the majority, were coming in by themselves, either from a nursing home or maybe they lived by themselves. And what I could see was that doctors and nurses were unable, I think as your previous caller said, they're unable to deliver the care that they would wish to deliver.
Yeah.
Because they actually physically can't even see half of these patients. So what ended up happening, whilst it was not great for my parents, at least they had someone there that was looking out for them.
I.e. you, but the loneliness.
Oh, exactly. Absolutely. Could get them a drink. I ended up, and my sister ended up, helping some other elderly people that were also in the corridor, but completely by themselves.
Well, that makes sense of today's story, doesn't it? That's why they're advertising for nurses to actually do the corridor care, because at the moment, the nurses will be doing that on top of what it is they're supposed to be doing when the corridors aren't full of actual patients. So they'll be dealing with people on the wards or people who need to be triaged. And then if you happen to be walking past somebody in the middle of a shift where you haven't had a break anyway and you think that they look like they desperately need a glass of water, you might be able to get it for them. If they were on the ward and the corridors weren't full of people, that would be part of the job. So now you've got a hospital, probably the one you're talking about actually, North London, Whittington Hospital in Archway, calling for registered nurses specifically to come in and do corridor care for the reasons that you describe. Oh, man alive. It is 11:30. I suppose on a lighter note, it's certainly upbeat. Mary has been in touch to say, I too have received excellent treatment at the Kidderminster Hospital Audiology Department. Praise where due. Good for you, Mary. Are you a massive celebrity as well, who only receives preferential treatment on account of your champagne socialist credentials? I think we should be told. Thomas Watts, though, has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are just sort of exploring the normalisation of so-called corridor care from the various relevant angles, and there are at least 3. The healthcare professional, the patient, the family member, the loved one who visits mum or dad and finds them in a corridor and can therefore provide the rest of us with some insight into what that is actually like. Dearie dear. I like this message because, for two reasons. One, it's very thoughtful, and two, it contains what is one of my all-time favourite words. But I need to make a small confession. I misused this word for years. I thought enervating meant like exciting. I thought it was a fancy word for exciting. So I would say to people, "Oh, that sounds very enervating," thinking I was being all clever. But it doesn't mean that at all. I once said it to a boss. I remember sitting at lunch and he was describing something that he'd done in his career. And I said, "That must have been very enervating." And I think it's one of those words that probably not quite enough people know what it means for me to have embarrassed myself enormously. I think most people, because of the way in which I used the word, would have just thought that it meant what I thought that it meant. So you say, "Oh, there, we won the FA Cup." I said, "That must have been so enervating." And you'd go, "Yeah, it was really enervating." You'd have to know exactly what it means to know that I was making a complete wombat of myself every time I used that word. Ruby knows what that word means. Ruby writes, "James, what is so enervating is that the population of the UK should be united in enraged protest at the disinvestment in health and social care. Instead, the least well-off are often turning towards Trump and other right-wing infused anti-state Darwinian propagandists. It's utterly bewildering. The absence of united public outrage at the state of the NHS is devastating. It's not nuanced. There has been a dismantling of public services while a few people have become richer than continents." Not the most important element of that message, the true meaning of the word enervating, but it means causing one to feel drained of energy or vitality. So the closest synonym would probably be exhausting, but it's more visceral than exhausting. If it's enervating, it's almost like you're having the energy sucked out of you, leached out of you by experience. And that's what I meant about psychic toll. So it's actually another way, perhaps, of describing the psychic toll of corridor care. And I don't think I'm going to put you in idiot's corner, but Phil suggests that if Jacob Rees-Mogg had been talking about it's preferable to be in a corridor than it is not to be in hospital at all, then my rhetoric would be very different. Phil, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, Phil, and just think that you need to give your ears a bit of a wash. I'm not defending it, mate. And if Jacob Rees-Mogg spoke about corridor care with the same casual contempt that he spoke, for example, about the victims of the Grenfell fire, then I would absolutely be coming out. If he tried to claim this was a good thing, as he did with food banks, as if it was somehow not a consequence of appalling government and appalling economic policies, as opposed to some sort of uplifting experience that we should all be proud of and excited by, then you're right, you'd have a point. But no, we're simply saying this is absolutely awful. But I suppose it could be worse. 11:38 is the time. Theo is in Manchester. Theo, what would you like to say?
Hello. So
Hello.
I'm currently a porter working on one of these corridor wards now,
Oh.
and so my thoughts are that we're seeing a lack of long-term investment. That's what I think you were saying earlier. It's symptomatic of poor government, poor management. That these new jobs on the corridor wards, it says it all. It's people are finding a short-term plaster, a little plaster on.
Well, they have to.
A massive bleeding wound.
They have to, don't they? In the context of what you're doing today, you need help on what's the word that we're looking for? In the scenario that you currently inhabit, you need help. So it's not necessarily either or. The short-term fix is not necessarily at the expense of long-term solutions. But now, it feels that way sometimes.
I suppose at the moment it feels like that because it's providing a solution to a problem that shouldn't exist in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
The disappointment is that you're saying it's not instead of, but we've not really seen a roadmap for long-term investments. We're not seeing investments in more wards because that takes more than 5 years. And at the end of the day, if a government is only going to be in for 5 years, we can't see that long-term growth. I think we need collaboration.
Yes.
We need a long-term roadmap. And I would have faith. I would say these jobs aren't too bad if we saw and had confidence in a long-term investment plan and strategy. But we're just not seeing it, and we're dying here. People are dying. We're wondering, when is this going to finish? When will we see a real solution?
How does it affect you? Both professionally, but also, Theo, personally. It must be quite. I'm going to use my favourite word, Theo. I hope you were listening to the little introduction I did before you came on. It must be deeply enervating. It must, but it must sort of really drain you to know that you can't do the job you want to do.
100%. I think what you were saying earlier about emotionally, we do, the nurses especially, we try to put on the best face we can for the patients. We smile, we chat, and the emotional labour of that, it takes its toll after so long, and we know there's only so much we can do for these people. We do our best, and you used the word corridor wards there quite casually. So is that something that you actually have in your hospital, a corridor that is now a de facto ward? Oh, yeah.
So that's going to have, 12 beds in it or 15? How many beds?
About 15.
15 beds in a corridor, and it's become, to all intents and purposes, a ward, but with none of the infrastructure or design that you would expect and need on a ward.
Absolutely, just the basics: plug sockets, space for trolleys, and everything. We don't have. They're not equipped for what they should do. But really, they're corridors. They're not wards. We need more wards.
How shocked are people when they discover that is what's going to happen to them?
I think what the saddest part about that is nowadays people, they're not surprised by it.
Right.
They're disappointed.
That's what normalised means, isn't it?
It's hard to look someone in the eye, especially the elderly. They've paid tax all their life, and we have to tell them that they're going to sleep in a corridor tonight.
Yeah.
There's only so much of a happy face we can do. We can tell them a joke. There's only so much we can do there.
Well, they're lucky to have you. They're lucky to have you. I can tell how much you care about your patients, and you do your job. But tell me a little bit about your job. If someone needs a bit of privacy in order to be examined, what happens? I mean, literally the logistics of it. What happens if they're in a corridor?
If we can, we'll try and wheel them off somewhere private. But
and what does that mean? Like a little bit near a lift, a bit near a lift, or a room that's usually used for something else?
Yeah, we can set up a screen around them, but they're not perfect. We've only got a limited number of those as well. You can't really get that privacy. It's a corridor.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's terrible.
And is it all year round?
Usually all year round. It gets worse at peak times, but now we're seeing it. It used to be an exception. Now it's every day.
And you're looking for a proper roadmap. I think next time Wes Streeting is in the studio with Sheila, you should ring him, Theo.
I'd love to. I think Labour started these corridor wards. It started under them. It exploded under the Tories. But I want Labour. Now we've got Labour back in. I want them to have a solution. I want them to give us confidence and hope for the future. Well, maybe they'll work together.
The two things really are social care and waiting lists, aren't they? I mean, if social care is massively improved, and they seem to have kicked that can a little bit down the road, sadly.
Yeah.
With Dilnot, but then with waiting lists, which they do seem to be trying to tackle, the partnerships with the private sector that Wes Streeting was announcing last week. If you sort out waiting lists and social care, then you begin the very arduous task of turning this oil tanker around, I think.
I think so. I mean, they're trying to tackle the problem here, and I do agree. But the paying the private sector off, that's just funding their greed. That's using public funds for private gain. And short term, fine, you're getting through the wait list. But long term, again, that's not solving the root of the issues.
No, I mean, you know exactly what you're talking about, and the pledge is that it will be short term and that it will cease to happen when the waiting list. There's a lot of crossing of fingers going on, isn't there, Theo? What time do you finish today?
I'll finish. I'm off at midnight.
Well, hang in there, mate, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so much.
All right, God bless you. Take care. 11:45 is the time, very nearly. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Of course, as one reminder, let me see who sent this message in. Paul in Aberdeenshire reminds us, I mean, it could be worse. You could have that absolute thoroughbred walloper promising 40 new hospitals and then doing absolutely nothing. Where are they? They destroyed this country, and his lies are still trying to break the people. Of whom could he possibly be speaking?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue our critique, if you like, of so-called corridor care, up to and including now corridor wards being spoken of quite casually as if it is, well, because it is now the new normal. They have been normalised. I've also got a missing word round for you. This is quite a good one, I think, but I wonder if you'll guess it. How I fought off a shark with just my blank. That one would work, wouldn't it, on Have I Got News For You? Because Paul Merton had come up with something hilarious at this point. How I fought off a shark with just my blank. Did I tell you someone was watching an old episode of Have I Got News For You the other day, and I called Elon Musk in 2017 a Bond villain? Did I mention that to you last week? If I did, I'm sorry for repeating it. It must be very boring for you. But that's quite prescient, isn't it? That was around the time I was using the word enervating a lot incorrectly. So I was on Have I Got News For You last night. It's a very enervating experience. That's not what you mean at all. Always check words. Always look them up if you're not sure what they mean. That's how you expand your vocabulary and avoid making a wombat of yourself. Corridor care. What is it like? Doreen is in Romford. Doreen, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I think you said, what was it like for you? So that's a bit I perhaps answer.
Thank you, Doreen.
It was absolutely awful, to be honest with you.
Oh, dear.
Oh, I'm not blaming staff, nurses, that was really working.
Yeah.
In a corridor, you're on a bed. I wasn't even on a hospital bed. I was on an ambulance bed because they couldn't find a hospital bed for me.
Good Lord.
Which is slightly narrower than the other bed, and I'm 5'10" tall. I'm 86 years old.
Right.
And what I was in there with was a little bit, I don't know the word, but I couldn't walk very far, let's put it that way.
Okay.
The toilet was at least 50, 60 yards away, through double doors, which were quite hard to push at my age. When I got the other side, there was a gents' toilet and a ladies' toilet, both being used by gentlemen, both in a state where, let's put it this way, my feet were wet.
Oh, Doreen.
I'm telling you the truth, mate.
I know you are, mate.
When they brought the breakfast round, I really laughed because it was a cheese or ham sandwich. And I did not even have a table between me and the next bed to put the cheese or ham sandwich on, so it fell on the floor, so I never had that. I had a beaker full of tea or coffee, I can't remember.
Right.
Because there was nowhere to put it. I had to put it on the handrail, balance it on the handrail.
That was risky.
It was, because it fell off as usual.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had some water with me. I never once had water offered to me. I had one wet wipe offered to me. I was in there 2.5 days, 3 days the first time. I've been there twice this year.
Oh, Doreen.
And no, I'm all right.
I know you are, but no one should have to go through this, let alone somebody who's 86.
My feet, I don't feel 86.
No, I can tell you don't.
My feet were touching the lady in front.
Well, when they were wet?
No, yeah, probably she seemed to have it.
I don't want to pry, but
yeah.
Did you get there? Did you go there in an ambulance, or did you? Pardon?
Yes, I did. The first days I was in there 17 days when I did get a bed.
Oh.
The second time they sent me out because they said that what I'd done I could manage home, which was fair enough.
Yeah.
As it turns out, I've got an appointment to come through today.
Right.
Seeing what they sent me out for February with a neurosurgeon. Never mind about that. That's just something that happens.
But how do they break it to you? I mean, the first time when perhaps you weren't expecting to be on a corridor, what do they say? What do they say to you? Because and I'm glad you've acknowledged they're all doing their best.
Honestly, I saw the consultant who first said to me, "Yeah, you've got to stay in."
Yeah.
And they put me there. I saw him that night running about with bottles of water, distributing because no one else was. You don't get the lights don't go off. That's another thing. You're talking about how it was for me. The lights don't go off at all.
That's exactly the sort of thing I was interested in. The thing you wouldn't notice or think about unless you were actually there. You see, so you don't.
And his wife is walking up and down. When another person goes past in a bed, or if you have got anyone with you, they have to squash themselves against the wall because the two beds can't get past. The nurses' station was not as big as my dining table.
Oh.
The nurses had to squash themselves when other beds came through. I mean, it's barbaric. There's nothing else to say about it. I immediately emailed West Street because he'd only been in about a couple of months, not even that, when I was in there last November, I think it was, or that in the April. It was like I asked him to come and visit us. Can I tell you something on the lighter side? Because I don't want you to think I'm a moaning old girl.
No one thinks that, Doreen.
When we went down, when I was a kid, we used to go down the underground because that's, at the bombings and that.
Yeah.
And my mum would always do us corned beef hash.
Yeah.
And when I got the menu for down there was two choices because you can't, and it was only corned beef hash, and I couldn't stop laughing.
Did you order it? Did you have some?
Yeah, it was lovely, actually.
Was it as good as your mum's?
No.
No chance at all.
No way.
Well, so that's the first time you've had it since then?
No, I do. Funny enough, I come back now and I think, I enjoyed that. I'm going to do it myself, but I'll put a bit of onion in it.
Do you?
Bit
of mustard, maybe?
Yeah.
I do. I just spice it up a bit. I like. Well, I haven't had a corned beef hash for years. We used to do it at my boarding school.
There were so many other things. I had one wet wipe in 3 days.
Yeah.
I didn't have a toothbrush, and a lady come round on a survey, one of these surveys they spend loads of money on, and she said to me, when did you last clean your teeth? I said, a week ago. What could I tell her? Honest.
Well, I hope you're not back in there anytime soon.
Do you know what? If I see the place, my son takes me by, as he will tomorrow when he takes me shopping.
Yes.
I read it. I look at it and I think, please don't let me go back in there.
Get a little bag. This is just me being a bit of a bore, but just get a little bag and put some wet wipes and a toothbrush and a toothpaste in it.
I did that the second time.
Oh, you did? And I was just going to say keep it by the front door just in case you need it.
Quite a quick learner.
Well, you clearly are. Yeah, you'll be taking your own corned beef hash in next time, Doreen, I think. And divvying it up around the, I wanted to say the ward. And the only bit I don't know is what they said to you when they were breaking the news to you that you weren't going to get into a ward on the whole visit. Like, there wasn't even a light at the end of the tunnel, as it were.
Well, no, they didn't say anything. To be honest with you, on the first time I was looking at the A&E, the bed was just pushed to the side.
Yeah.
The second time, I was so far back, it had way out written on it.
God, blimey. Well,
all that is the truth, and there's loads more.
I know there is. I can tell. We've scratched the sides, Doreen. Thank you, and that really is the perfect testimony, because you're precisely the sort of person that I think Theo was talking about when he described how hard it is for them on the other side of the equation, the people working in the hospitals, to have to consign people like you to these kind of experiences. But thank you for also finding some levity, finding the brighter side of it. I think we could probably all agree that you need to in these kind of scenarios, because the alternative would be despair. Doreen, stay safe. It's 5 to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's go to Brentwood next. Mary is there. Mary, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello,
I was in the hospital late November time, and I was in one of those. I was in A&E. I went in by ambulance, and I had to sit out there for quite a while in the A&E. Then they said, we've got a bed for you.
Oh, yeah.
They took me around in the wheelchair. We went round and round and round so far. That was in Romford, by the way, the hospital. And eventually they took me, and it was in a corridor. And I said, what? This isn't a ward, it's a corridor. No, but we've got a bed for you. Wow. So they gave me this bed, which was not too bad, but it was right up by the nurses' station. Now, the nurses were actually wonderful, and the doctors were very good. And I got into this bed, but I had to ask them to go to the toilet, because the doors were so heavy for the toilet, I couldn't open them, and they had to sort of swipe me through with one of those fobs.
Yeah.
It was okay. So they waited for me, so I couldn't have a wash or anything while they were there.
I'm sorry.
My hands came out. Now, at night time, which was late evening when they took me through there were people coming up and down there cleaning the floors. You know, with those polishing machines.
Yeah.
And then going through to the other side, backwards and forwards, like a normal corridor would be. And the night staff came on, and they were bank staff, and they talked all the way through.
So you couldn't get any rest?
No, there was no sleep whatsoever. I'd already made my mind up I wouldn't get a lot of sleep, but no, there was nothing. Walking up and down and
listening to you and Doreen, it's this weird mix, isn't it, Mary, of shocking and ordinary, because that is happening all the time, all over the place, and yet when you're in the middle of it, like you were, it's still shocking.
It was, because I didn't expect it. Didn't expect it. And when my son picked me up the next day, he said, where are you? And he couldn't find me. Eventually he did, and he couldn't believe it.
Because he thought you'd be in a ward.
That's right.
With a table next to you, and, you know.
That's right.
Oh, my days. Are you all right now? Were you well looked after? I mean,
I was well looked after, and I've had follow-up appointments and things at different places. But no, I was well looked after, and the staff were fantastic. But the whole setup is terrible, really. If you think about it, it really is.
Yeah. No, and I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? The patients are the ones that suffer, and the staff are the ones that have to do everything they can to minimise the impacts, to make it less unpleasant than it would otherwise be. Mary, thank you, and do take care. I don't know what it's going to look like. Theo was very interesting, wasn't he? The hospital porter up in Manchester on that. The reassuring nature of an actual plan. You know, the idea that you can lay out what is actually going to happen. Keir Starmer giving a speech today about AI, which is what we were talking about in the first hour. You want a sort of sense of a roadmap, don't you, or a to-do list almost, where you could check whether or not they were ticking off the things that need to be done in order to denormalise. Is that the right word? To denormalise so-called corridor care. Do you want a solution? I got some quite good ones on this. How I fought off a shark with just my blank. Kevin Folkestone suggests how I fought off a shark with just my cease and desist threat. Quite a lot of you have obviously got Liz Truss on the brain. Well, I don't understand why there's about a dozen responses to this that involve Liz Truss. I have absolutely no. Oh, Stu's been paying attention to the programme. How I fought off a shark with just my fast catamaran. A reference to Hard Man of Brexit, Steve Baker. How I fought off a shark with just my Fisher-Price telescope, suggests Stu. And Sam's been in touch to say, you're not going to believe this, James, but I had to correct my mother on her incorrect use of the word enervating only yesterday. It is a small world indeed. The correct answer is fingers.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 12 is the time. There are two stories in the news about anxiety. One is a bit silly and one is anything but. The silly one involves so-called Generation Z being so anxious that they call in the experts even to change a light bulb. This is. Do you remember when I told you what a Sunday for Monday was? Do you remember? I don't know what newspapers are like these days. It's so long since I've worked on one. But a Sunday for Monday was when the bar for getting a story in a paper was quite low, because the office would largely be empty on a Sunday. There'd hardly be anyone in. And whoever ended up editing would come round on Friday afternoon before you went home for the weekend and ask if you'd got anything Sunday for Monday. So something they could put in Monday's newspaper. And quite often it would involve a press release or a sort of made-up poll or a survey of some sort, which wouldn't get into the paper normally because there'd be proper news vying for attention. But so when I see a story like this, I usually clock the fact that it's Monday. This has got Sunday for Monday written all over it because it is by Halfords. The survey, the research has been conducted for Halfords, and it has found that those aged 18 to 27 were most likely to pay a professional to carry out basic tasks around the home or in the car, with nearly a quarter admitting that they couldn't change a ceiling light bulb. What percentage of Generation Zs knew what a spanner was? And I mean a spanner of the toolbox variety, not the human variety. According to this, 21% of people aged between 18 and 27 don't know what a spanner is. So I was toying with the idea, and if it was Friday, I may have gone down the path of finding out the most banal thing that the younger person in your... But then again, it all sounds a bit ageist. You get a phone call off your kid because he doesn't know how to... What? The most simple job, rebalance a radiator. No, I'm joking. You had to be listening to the first hour of the programme to understand why that was a point of reference. So that's not it. That's not the conversation that we are having now, although it does speak to anxiety in a very different way from how Tony Blair... There's two stories, crikey, involving Tony Blair's public interventions. One about AI and this one about medicalising what he calls ups and downs. Now, I think this is one of the most important issues of our time. Not the specific detail of what Tony Blair has said, but the explosion in anxiety and depression diagnoses in the UK, particularly, but by no means exclusively, among young people. I've got theories that you might snigger at, actually, but I think quite a lot of this is likely to have physical explanations as opposed to
more obviously mental ones. I think that the impact of long COVID on people's mental health is being hugely underestimated, and there's work being done in an area called the blood-brain barrier that would see an awful lot of things that present as mental health problems, particularly depression, that actually have physical health explanations, that have post-viral explanations. But that doesn't really help us answer the questions that Tony Blair is posing today. You hear this a lot, largely from older people, but by no means exclusively. It's often accompanied by use of the word resilience. People need to be more resilient, which is, I think, if you're not feeling resilient, about as much use as being told that you should learn how to fly sometimes. So people need to fly more. You need to learn how to fly. You need to be more resilient. But we all have this sense, because we've all done it ourselves, we all have a sense sometimes that when people are, and this is a conversation informed by the benefits bill, when people are telling you that they can't do something because of their mental health, I say we all have a response. An awful lot of people have a knee-jerk, a reflex response to that, which is to sort of G them up a bit. Do you know what I mean? So I can't leave the house today, you might say, and you go, and you think you're doing it from a place of love. You think you're doing it for good. You go, oh, yes, you can. Come on. Because you think of your own experiences, right? You think of the days where you really didn't want to get out of bed, but you kind of knew that you had to. So you did. The days when you really got some heavy lift, dreading it. Absolutely dread it, but I've got to do it. So you translate your experiences, you project them onto other people, which is what I think Tony Blair is doing when he says that we are over-medicalising ups and downs. It's not a million miles away from what Mel Stride was saying before the last election. He says, I think we have become very, very focused on mental health and with people self-diagnosing. We're spending vastly more on mental health now than we did a few years ago, and it's hard to see what the objective reasons for that are. Is it? And then you get this bit. Life has its ups and downs, and everybody experiences those. And you've got to be careful of encouraging people to think they've got some sort of condition other than simply confronting the challenges of life. We need a proper public conversation about this, because you really cannot afford to be spending the amount of money we're spending on mental health. And as he points out, it's in the last few years that the ramp up of that has been dramatic. Now, my usual reaction to this sort of rhetoric is to point out that it's actually really hard to get the kind of diagnosis that you would need to get an actual welfare payment, to get actual benefits, albeit that the cost of benefits supporting those whose work prospects are affected by such diagnoses have soared. I don't think, and again, I could be wrong, but I don't think doctors are doling out these kind of sick notes willy-nilly. My understanding, which is not great, I'll be honest with you, that's why the phone lines are about to be opened. My understanding is that it's really hard to get signed off sick with, in this case, most obviously, depression or anxiety. So that's going to be question number one. How hard is it? 0345 6060 973 to get signed off sick with depression or anxiety? Because this entire conversation hinges on a presumption that people are, if not swinging the lead, then at least giving up too easily. And I'm very uncomfortable with that. But that doesn't mean it's not true. It just means I'm very uncomfortable with it. I think we've got a really fat side order of, I don't mean you, on this one. So if someone you know or someone you love is suffering in this way and tells you, I can't face going to work, I just can't do it. I'm too depressed. I'm too anxious. You probably believe them, but you are simultaneously persuaded that there must be quite a lot of people who are capable of doing it if only they could push themselves just a tiny bit harder. and of course, as Ollie reminds us, being too quick to diagnose depression is better than being too slow. And just telling people to get on with it, that can lead to a road of suicidal thoughts and maybe even worse. What's the question that we're going to ask here? I'm just wondering about the distinctions. They're so perforated, aren't they? They're such grey areas, these. The difference between normal ups and downs, as Tony Blair chooses to describe them, like the ups and downs that everybody experiences, and the experiences and conditions that might realistically see you signed off work. 0345 6060 973. Because I worry that when I hear rhetoric like this, it overlooks things like an explosion in self-harm, for example. How are you going to do that with more resilience? So someone is hurting themselves, someone is cutting themselves, perhaps, and you're saying, "Oh, come on, we all have ups and downs. You've got to get." Do you see what I mean? I think there's a generational lag here. I think that there is something that's happened, and it isn't what Tony Blair thinks it is when he talks about his own essential experience. Life has its ups and downs, and everybody experiences those. But life didn't used to involve thousands and thousands of teenagers suffering mentally to a degree that makes them want to hurt themselves physically. So something has changed. And that's the other question here. This notion he has about the conversation about the objective reasons for that. I think we've become very, very focused on mental health and with people self-diagnosing. That is probably true. But the objective reasons for it are not clear. I'm not so sure that is true. Let's find out, okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How do you persuade somebody like Tony Blair that this is not about the ups and downs that everybody experiences? Okay, hit the numbers now, you will get through. And how do we account for the huge surges in the number of people being diagnosed with mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression in the UK? So I suppose the answer he's offering up is a lot of these people don't really have them, which, it's not exactly Occam's razor, is it? But you can see why it's attractive to politicians. It's a simple answer to a complicated question, but it's not by definition wrong. Why do we have an explosion of mental health problems? Yeah? Answer, we don't. It's just an awful lot of people think they've got mental health problems when they're just going through the sort of trials and tribulations that we've all been going through forever. I, at the moment, reject that. I don't believe that. I think something has changed. I think something has shifted. I don't think it's a coincidence that things have got much worse since the pandemic. I don't have the qualifications. I certainly don't have the evidence to explore further my own thoughts about the link between post-viral and mental health. But I don't know who he thinks he's going to help by suggesting that people are just going through life's normal ups and downs. I really don't. So hit the numbers now. You will get through. Question number one. How does someone like Tony Blair come to understand that it's not just life's ups and downs? And part of that will be a question about how easy it is to get signed off. So actually, can we do that first? How easy is it? Or how hard is it to get signed off work with anxiety or depression? All right, 0345 6060 973. Because if it's not easy, an awful lot of Tony Blair's argument here disappears immediately. And then the second question becomes, how do you persuade someone who thinks it's all about resilience and life's ups and downs? I always use the example of someone with a broken leg. You would never say to someone with a broken leg, come on, just a bit more of a positive mental attitude, you'll be able to run 100 metres, would you? You just wouldn't do that. Come on, you can do this. You've just got to, we've all been through this, but it shouldn't stop you from running up and down stairs.
And yet at the same time, I hope I'm explaining this sensitively, at the same time, we do know what it feels like to think we can't do something and just somehow finding somewhere inside us the wherewithal to press on and do it. So those two things are contradictory. When I say to you, you wouldn't speak to someone with a broken leg like that. You wouldn't tell them to just try a little bit harder, to be a little bit more resilient, to push themselves a little bit more. But at the same time, from our own personal experience, and it has to be from the inside, this one, it can't be stuff you've told other people. You know that there have been times you've thought, I can't face this, I can't do that. And you've managed to. So that's where the idea comes from, that people can be persuaded or cajoled or encouraged into doing something that they insist they can't do. I don't know if it's possible to marry those two positions together. You wouldn't say that to someone with a broken leg, but you know that there is a relationship between mental attitude and overcoming at least anxiety, if not depression. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So how easy is it? And I don't want to hear about your friend's mum or your friend's mum's boyfriend. All right, I only want to hear from you. Okay, I should have made that clearer. Actually, I only want to hear from you about how easy or hard it is to get signed off sick with anxiety or depression. I don't want anecdotal evidence about someone who you got told about last week down at the bingo. And then I want to know about the line between normal ups and downs and what you go through, what you deal with. What would you say to Tony Blair if he said to you, oh, it's just life's ups and downs and everybody experiences those, okay? 0345 6060 973. And then the really tricky one. How do we, as in you and me, how do we process the fact that having depression, telling someone with depression to do something they can't do would be like telling someone with a broken leg to go and run 100 metres. How do we marry that knowledge to the experience of actually overcoming fear and which we know is a thing and we know it's something we can do? 18 minutes after 12 is the time. The number you need, 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 12. Germany's worse. Germany's the worst in Europe for sick days at the moment. Some recent headlines in German media. Have we all become slackers? Was a headline in the Tagesspiegel. Are we lazy or simply finished? Asked the tabloid Bild. And Handelsblatt even spoke of the sick republic. This is Germany becoming Europe's sort of leading sick leave, and that as a country, it's described by economists as a significant impediment to growth recovery. So it's not unique to the United Kingdom, and it's certainly not, as Rupert Imbista suggests, proof that the system here is being milked because these sickness numbers don't compare with other Western European countries. Mate, you could just have Googled that before you sent me a message, trying to turn it into yet another kind of, let's blame all the people who have got problems by pretending that they haven't. There'll be some people swinging the lead everywhere you go, but enough to explain the numbers that we're seeing now? I don't think so. 12:21 is the time. Lucy's in Merton. Lucy, what would you like to say?
Hi. Yes. Hi. Just to answer your question around, is it easy to get signed off from work?
Yes.
So I have had, unfortunately, 3 mental health breakdowns since 2013.
Gosh.
Which is always fun. That's okay. And I'm well now. But yeah, I would say, unfortunately, each time it's been quite, thankfully, it's been, it's simple for me to get signed off work because it's been, reached a crisis point where it's quite obvious that you can't work. And I think that... I
suppose the subtext of the question I'm asking is how easy is it to get signed off work when you don't need to be signed off work, isn't it? Which is a slightly different question from the one you're asking.
No, that's true. And I would say to that the first time I became unwell, which was 2013, I went to the doctor several times, and I wouldn't say I was particularly productive at work because I was worried all the time.
Right.
And I thought I had like a stomach problem and all of this, and I kept getting, lots of different prescriptions for physical medication and tablets for like a physical issue, and no one had ever brought up, and I hope it's changed now because it was 2013, but no one had ever brought up, do you think you might have anxiety? So that sort of, it took a while, as I said, until I was quite clearly had anxiety.
And it got diagnosed, and it got worse. And it puts you in a position to tell Tony Blair and others what the difference is between what you've been through and what life's ups and downs that everybody experiences are. How would you best distinguish between those two things?
It's really hard to, I think, as people have had a crisis or a mental health issue, it's really hard to explain till you've been there. But one of the things they ask, one of the things that doctors ask you, which is one of the symptoms, is like it becomes a problem when it's affecting your ability to do everyday tasks. So I would say that, if I wake up in the morning...
I know that's a figure of speech, but what sort of thing would you not have been able to do in the bad times?
I just remember, I just remember one of the times I realised it was really getting bad is like, I can't make a cup of tea. Like, I can't bear the thought of going over to make a tea. And I know that sounds, it's kind of like you can't do one, I guess this might help. Like, if you have really bad anxiety, it really affects your ability to concentrate.
Yeah, of course.
So your head is completely full of other stuff, the worries. So you can't actually focus on anything. So this isn't talking about, how bad it makes you feel, which is another issue, obviously, from these normal ups and downs, but you physically can't.
It's impossible to convey that, isn't it? Because immediately people are thinking, well, I often feel like I can't be bothered I can't take the bins out, or I really don't want to do this, but I have to do it, and therefore I'll do it. You can't. There's a real riddle here, isn't there? That's why you said quite rightly, it's hard to convey if you haven't been through it. You think about getting out of bed or school refusal in children. You just can't get your head around why. They're not just other versions of you. And so, you didn't want to go to school, but you had to, and you did. But this is a different order of experience.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I would say to caveat, I'm 37 now. So this is I've had, 3 breakdowns. Maybe they last for a few months to a year.
Right.
And I would say, for the other 34 years of my life. It's not like I'm not used to ups and downs. Like, I know what an up and down is, and I've had days when I don't want to go to work. But I think the difference is you don't want to go to work. You get up, you go to work. By the end of the day, you're like, oh, okay, it wasn't that bad. It was fine. You've forgotten about what you're worrying about. When you wake up in the morning with anxiety, you're already worrying about the day after tomorrow. And then you get up and you have to get up, but it doesn't feel any better, and it can feel worse. Whereas when you're feeling well and you go, I don't want to go to the gym, but it's going to help, you go to the gym and you sort of have the reward of feeling better. So when you're unwell, you go to the gym and you feel just as bad, sometimes worse, but you just have to keep pushing through.
Yes.
And when people are off work or off, it doesn't, the solution or what people do isn't just like, they don't lie in bed all day. I know that's what people think, and sometimes you do with depression, but I think people with depression and anxiety are actually, some of the most brave people, and just because they aren't able to work, which, by the way, they would love to be able to.
Yeah, this is
to themselves that they're feeling okay.
No, well, exactly that, and that's why people like Rupert in Bicester insisting that the system is being milked, or here's Andy saying if people didn't get paid while off with mental health, the numbers would fall overnight. Well, the suicide numbers wouldn't, mate. £116.75 per week on statutory sick pay. Per week, £116.75. So, I just can't help thinking that the most cursory research, and there'll be other benefits available to some people, but the most cursory research will undo the most ignorant of tabloid responses to these sort of stories. But we've had 50 years of being told that everybody on benefits is swinging the lead. So factor in some health conditions that are invisible, and you can understand why people like Andy are so easily persuaded, or even persuading themselves, that everyone's a wrong. And Chris is in Middlesbrough. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James.
Hello,
big
mate.
fan. So thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
So I suffer from depression and anxiety. And I'd just like to try and explain sort of the difference between feeling anxious and having anxiety.
Yes, perfectly put.
That feeling when you think you've lost your phone or your wallet and you sort of freeze for a moment and then you think, right, I'll start looking for it. I can wake up on a morning frozen like that, similar kind of thing. And I can't do anything about it. I'm literally sort of frozen in place. It's that horrible feeling, and it doesn't just last a moment where I can go, okay, I can do something about it, I can look for it. It keeps me like that for sometimes a day, a month. And it is so different to just being a little bit worried about something. It completely takes over your body.
I hear you. I'm here. I'm listening. Oh, the phone had gone. He thought I'd gone, but I think we lost Chris a bit there, because that's the point. And it is invisible. And of course, there are physical symptoms. Heart palpitations, rashes, constant swinging, dizziness, shaking, nausea, mental disassociation, that weird feeling that you're not there, or all sorts of things going on. But all, or often, kind of invisible. 29 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's tricky, right? I don't know how helpful it is to come out with all guns blazing, insisting that absolutely everybody who says that they suffer from anxiety and depression is absolutely telling nothing but the truth and deserves to be signed off sick. And I don't know how helpful it is. Well, I certainly know it's at least unhelpful to come out and say that they're all swinging the lead. Categorically believe that the massive majority of people, like the ones we've just spoken to, are in need of proper help from the system. But, and Tony Blair talks about the normal ups and downs of life. What is he missing? And possibly, what are his critics missing? I'm also struck, I'll just leave you with this as we head towards the headline. I've also suddenly realised we are in danger here of discovering Schrodinger's sick note, because precisely the sort of people who seem minded to tell me that depression's not real or that these people are all milking the system are also the same people who insist it's impossible to get an appointment at the GPs. So if you can't get an appointment at the GP, how do you get a sick note? Riddle me that. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You know when you wake up in the middle of the night, let me read this one, and you feel scared for no reason, even when you tell yourself everything's okay, you're just worried until you drop off again. That's how I feel all the time now, says Jonathan. I'm in contact with others with long COVID, and this seems quite common. There is no known remedy. I think that would be the part of the answer to why there's been an explosion post-pandemic in these kind of issues, these kind of diagnoses. That then there's the nuance of the benefit system of the welfare state, where the difference between getting a sick note and getting signed off long-term when you move into a different category needs to be better explored. I just don't quite buy that for 116 quid a week people are pretending to have debilitating conditions in their hundreds of thousands. I just don't buy it, although I fully understand why that is attractive to people who don't like thinking or who aren't big on empathy. But I could be wrong. I could be thinking about it and cloaking myself in empathy and wrong. I just don't quite buy it. Have a listen to what Tony Blair had to say. Mary is up next. And this is in an interview for a podcast called Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, which has nothing to do with me. It is instead presented by a former Downing Street advisor called Jimmy McLaughlin. And I'll ask you to listen to this with the words of no hostages ringing in your ears as well, or at least in the back of your mind, because they point out, and this is, as I've mentioned before, a social media account I rather like, this time on Blue Sky, that you don't ask ex-politicians like Tony Blair for mental health advice. You ask a psychologist or a psychiatrist or someone with lived experience instead. Blair has about as much expertise in this area as Timmy Mallet's mallet. And yet, you know, the Secretary of State for Health, you probably would listen to, or you would expect to listen to, despite the fact that they rarely have any more qualifications in healthcare provision or mental health specifically than Timmy Mallett's much missed Mallet. 12:36 is the time. So have a listen to what Blair is saying. But with those words, that point about who would you go to for advice about mental health or insights into mental health? Here he is talking to Jimmy McLaughlin on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, which is available if you want to listen to it later on the Global Player.
One of the things that we do know, though, in the UK is that we've got close to 1 million more people not in work now than pre the pandemic, which is a remarkable statistic. And we seem to be struggling a lot more than other countries with this. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure is the honest answer, but it is a massive problem. I think that a lot of, there may be some aspects of long COVID, but then that shouldn't affect us more than it affects any other country. I think we have become very, very focused on mental health, and with people self-diagnosing on mental health, and I think we need a proper public conversation about that because, I think it's a very, very difficult question. We're spending vastly more on mental health now than we did a few years ago. And it's hard to see what the objective reasons for that are. And if we're not careful, we get into a position where people, life has its ups and downs and everybody experiences those. And you've got to be careful of encouraging people to think they've got some sort of condition other than, simply confronting the challenges of life. And so we need a proper public conversation about this because you really cannot afford to be spending the amount of money we're spending on mental health, and the ramp up of that just in these last few years has been dramatic.
Do you think we need some sort of review or commission in regards to that?
Well, I think we need, and this again, technology can help with this. It can help. By the way, there's some really interesting innovations happening in different parts of the world on how technology can help with mental health issues and problems that people have. But we need also to be helping people to understand that, there are, in life there are going to be problems, right?
Yeah.
Now, you've got to be careful of translating those into a mental health condition rather than, and losing your own agency in a way to govern your own life. So I think it's very, very difficult, but it's a conversation we need to have.
It is 12:39. I mean, that started off, he's an interesting character, Blair, isn't he? He started off, I think, reluctant to say, I don't know. If you're Tony Blair, you probably haven't said I don't know for about 50 years. I just don't know, mate. I haven't got a clue. Sorry. No, someone reviewed his recent book and said it's a self-help book for people who think they should be running G8 countries. Oh, that's pretty good. I wish I'd come up with that myself. This is where you will, Oscar, you will. And then it was good, not a bad line of questioning, because it got a little bit more fruitful. And this idea that there must be something going on that is not immediately obvious. And you can draw parallels with some other economies. But what is different about this place is it has had 14 years of austerity. It's had 14 years of epic mismanagement. Whereby people's relationship with work and relationship with life has been horribly compromised. The simple equation whereby you think that effort is rewarded, I think has been taken away from millions of people in this country. But that adds to the idea that he may have a point when he talks about well, self-diagnosis isn't really relevant to this, because if you're self-diagnosing, you're not going to be signed off sick by a doctor, are you? You're just going to be living in a kind of liminal economic space. And that is the other thing that fascinates me. We're not going to talk about this today, but I remain fascinated by what these people are doing, these sort of economically inactive people who aren't claiming any support, but who
are not economically inactive in real life, even though technically they are. I was reading a little bit this weekend about an increase in the taxman going to take slightly more of an interest in people who are doing a lot of buying and selling online and stuff like that. But it can't be enough to explain some of these numbers. 900,000 more people off sick due to long-term sickness than before the pandemic. It's not all going to be mental health by any stretch of the imagination. Partly waiting lists, you see. Why does no one mention that? Some of these people are going to be signed off sick because they can't do the job that they would be able to do if they'd had their new hip or if they'd had the operation that they need but haven't got because they've been on a waiting list for 2.5 years. But the mental health one, I think, fascinates people, partly because of the invisibility, which lends itself to the confusion that I think you could hear Tony Blair articulating there at the beginning of that little exchange. Mary is in Birmingham. Mary, what would you like to say?
I've never spoken about my mental health journey publicly, so I'm a little bit nervous because, yeah.
Well, take your time.
My mental health journey started when I was 12. It took me 3 attempts on my life and 4 years before I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. It then took another 3 attempts on my life and another 4 years before I was told that I had borderline personality disorder.
Right.
And then it took another few attempts on my life and another few years before they added chronic PTSD onto that as well.
Okay.
This isn't about normal ups and downs in life. It's not about... And actually, if I, and I'm not trying to minimise depression and anxiety at all, if I could just say I had that, then that'd be lovely. The energy that took me when I was, 16, to still be going to school, to still be getting up, to still be getting dressed, that was hard enough, and that was a misdiagnosis. When it's the right diagnosis, and it's not easy to get signed off at all. It took me 3 attempts to be signed off, and the last attempt I had of being signed off.
Yes.
With the full support of my friends and family, I went in there not having taken my medication for a week because the only way they could see how bad it was for me to not have anything in my system that would mask that.
Right.
And I've sat in front of mental health specialists and whatever, and I've sat there and I've been medicated and I've told them that I'm fine when I'm on the verge of crisis and walked out of the room because they think I'm fine. So the only way I could prove that I wasn't was to actually sit there and not be okay. And I couldn't speak a word. I was literally sat there with my hands over my ears, rocking, and I couldn't even look at the woman. And it took her 5 seconds, and she looked at me and she went, "You're not working, are you?" And it took me so long to get signed off. And I don't know what Tony Blair's been through in his life. I'm so glad for him that he doesn't have to know what it's like to have severe mental health difficulties or problems or whatever it is. I'm so glad that he doesn't.
I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure if he was here, he'd say he wasn't talking about you. And oddly, you kind of made that point for him when you drew comparisons with anxiety and depression as being less debilitating than what you go through and what you have been through. So if we see that sliding scale of debilitation, then there will be some people near the bottom of it about whom he perhaps is talking. And he is suggesting that for some people, if not for you, then this word resilience that has grown in popularity in recent years might be an answer to some of the...
I don't know if you can say that because what's a relatively small and trivial thing for Tony Blair might be for somebody the most traumatic thing they've been through.
Yeah.
And so actually their reality is completely different from his, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean it's any less real or any less traumatic for the person that's got depression.
And there it is. You've just absolutely nailed it, haven't you? Is that you and I could be faced with identical problems, let's say challenges, and I might feel cowed or overwhelmed, but what I feel with an identical problem is going to bear no resemblance whatsoever to what you feel. So me telling you what you should do to overcome this challenge that I've just overcome is worse than unhelpful. It's actively damaging.
Yeah, because there's also the problem that the mental health system's just broken.
That's for sure.
I was stuck in it from the age of 12 to I've been stuck in it most of my adult life, most of my adolescence. It's never worked. it's never been fit. It can just about deal with depression and anxiety. It can't deal with anything more. Because if you deal with anything more, there's almost this, and amongst my friends and family who are, I've got psychiatric nurses in the family and that sort of thing, and there's almost this scale where you're not quite bad enough to be dealt with by mental health services yet, but then you very quickly tip into, you're too severe to us to deal with and you should have come to us sooner. Well, yes, that's fine, but then when is there the point where we can come and we can be helped? And that's been CAMS, that's been adult services, that's been, for me to have any sort of help has been an uphill struggle for the best.
And that's a story we hear a lot, and I think it actually probably gets worse as you get older, even though it's usually CAMS that is the source of most complaints that we deal with on the programme. And George takes up this theme. Says, no, not George, I beg your pardon, Carl. What are normal ups and downs in life? We didn't evolve to live how we're currently expected to live. We aren't compatible with the societies we are living in, says Carl in Kimber, which is unhelpful, really, because as soon as I see the word Kimber, the first thing I think of is caves. I grew up near Kimber, and until relatively recently, people were still living in caves in Kimber, in the sandstone rocks. They sort of had houses at the front, and then they went back like a house front, as it were. But the actual building itself went right back into the caves. You can still see them at Kimber Edge if you're ever in that part of the world, which is not the response Carl was expecting when he pointed out the societal transformation that will no doubt be a contributing factor to the conditions that we are discussing. 12:47 is the time. Natasha Clarke has been at that speech where Keir Starmer was enthusing, waxing lyrical about AI and what it might be able to do. Keith pointed out that we were talking about some pretty heavy stuff in the first hour of the programme, some fairly hefty impacts. And the first thing we heard Keir Starmer say about it was be able to spot potholes. Hey, nobody cares about potholes more than I do, but I don't know if that's how you sell the fastest technological and scientific revolution in the history of humanity to the people, by going in hard on the potholes. We'll find out after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
51 is the time. Catch up with Natasha imminently on this AI speech by Keir Starmer that Sheila Fogarty will be returning your attention to after 1 o'clock. I just want to give a shout out to a couple of lads who I met on Friday who really looked after me. I've been a bit sceptical in the past about the appeal of watches. You know, when people collect, partly because that Mark Zuckerberg thing the other day was wearing a $900,000 watch. But I had occasion to go to a little watch stall in Gray's Antiques Market in London, just near Bond Street, an outfit called Tortoise Watches. And I can't remember the last time I had an encounter, a customer-facing encounter that was so charming and delightful. So my thanks to Adnan, whose business it is, and to Simon, who is the watch mender. And talking about AI in the first hour, watching someone just like take a watch to pieces and start fiddling around with the insides, it's a really, really special, really lovely experience. So if you are in that kind of, in that world, if you are enthusiastic about that kind of thing, I can absolutely recommend those two Tortoise Watches. And the other person I would like to say thank you to is Ren, who runs a company called Ren's Kitchen, and sent me probably, don't tell Mrs. O'Brien, probably my favourite Christmas present was a box of spices. I've got spices now to cover almost every imaginable eventuality, and I've already made 2 curries. I've made a sagaloo and I made a chicken curry, and the difference when you've got top quality spices is, I can't tell you, it's better than a takeaway. I'm not going to invite you around to prove it, but I hand on heart, because it's got a different relationship with the oils. It's just a healthier meal. So Ren's Kitchen is the name of her company. I think she does lessons as well in curry preparation and knocks out a lovely selection of spices. So there you go. That's me doing my bit for small British businesses. 12:53 is the time. Natasha Clarke is here. Keir Starmer has been speaking about AI, and Natasha Clarke is here to tell us what he said.
Morning, James. Yes, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been setting out his plans for the UK to become a great AI superpower this morning. He hopes it's going to boost growth, and we know that that's obviously not been doing too well in recent months, and create jobs as well. He said it's going to be the defining opportunity for our generation. He wants it to be used for everything from lesson planning for teachers to finding potholes on our roads. But of course, this is pretty controversial to be putting it at the heart of Whitehall. He did acknowledge that there would be a lot of worries about the new technology, about jobs being taken over by robots, but he did say that this is all coming quicker than we think, that the battle for the jobs of tomorrow is happening today. He also said that we shouldn't be afraid of the opportunities that AI can bring.
And the blunt truth is we've got to be much bolder. I've seen this for myself as a leader of a public service, and this is entirely human. But new technology can provoke a reaction, a sort of fear, an inhibition, a caution, if you like. And because of the fears of a small risk, too often you miss the massive opportunity. So we've got to challenge that mindset. Because actually, the far bigger risk is that if we don't go for it, we're left behind by those who do. And that's what I mean about totally rewiring government, being emboldened to take risks, as our brilliant entrepreneurs do, restless and relentless, because the prize within our grasp is the path to national renewal.
And James, he also faced a lot of questions about Rachel Reeves, of course, the Chancellor, under a lot of pressure as borrowing costs rise and what it might mean for the future of the public finances and how much money she's going to be able to tax and spend on us in just a couple of months' time. I was also quite keen to ask the Prime Minister about two things. About one, what does this mean for our NHS data? And secondly, whether the Treasury were right to pursue what's been described today as ruthless spending cuts.
You said that your plan will allow firms to use the unique resource of our NHS and our data. Which data is up for grabs, and will this be used to raise some money for the government? And just on the economy, is the Treasury right to be ruthless in their pursuit of spending cuts in the upcoming spending review? Thank you.
Yeah, just on the NHS, the first thing I'd say is we are in a unique position in this country because we've got the National Health Service. And the use of that data has already driven forward advances in medicine and will continue to do so. So we have to see this as a huge opportunity that will impact on the lives of millions of people really profoundly. The example I gave at the beginning of the speech was of someone who'd already had a stroke, but this has the potential to get ahead of that, to predict and prevent. And what a difference that will make to the lives of millions of people. It is important that we keep control of that data. I completely accept that challenge, and we will also do so. But I don't think that we should have a defensive stance here that will inhibit the sort of breakthroughs that we need. In terms of the ruthless approach when it comes to finances and spending, yes, we will be ruthless, as we have been ruthless in the decisions that we've taken so far. We've got clear fiscal rules, and we're going to keep to those fiscal rules, and that's why the Chancellor was absolutely right in the words that she chose to describe the approach that we will take.
So, James, we are in a unique position that we've got NHS data, which he says he will see it as a huge opportunity for the country to use that NHS data to try and solve some of the problems of the future. Now, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that will agree with the Prime Minister's approach, but there will be a lot of people who will be very uneasy about the idea of using our NHS data, scans, potentially sort of results, and putting that into what is going to be the artificial intelligence of the future, trying to use it to solve tomorrow's problems and exactly what it could mean. But the Prime Minister pretty adamant that he thought that was the right thing to do. Now, also in the second answer, I asked the Prime Minister about whether the Treasury were right to pursue that ruthless idea of spending cuts. He absolutely backed that, saying that it was right to take such an approach to public spending. Now, there's going to be a lot of government departments that are going to be very worried about what that means for their departments, what that means for their spending in the coming months up to that spending review. And of course, Rachel Reeves, like I said, under a lot of pressure at the moment about whether she will have the headroom to make any changes to the government finances and what it will mean, because those borrowing costs, as we have seen over the past few days, just going up and up.
Not a lot to celebrate. Did anyone ask him about Tulip Siddiq?
No, we didn't actually. I don't believe there was an answer about Tulip Sadiq today. Actually, she obviously there has been a few extra reports out over the weekend about exactly what her involvement has been in her aunt's former deposed regime in Bangladesh. There was actually some very interesting reports in the Sunday Times that some of her literature had ended up on the floor of some of those buildings. No, we didn't get a chance to ask the Prime Minister about that. He did, however, say that he had full confidence in Rachel Reeves and the whole team, and that was the answer that he gave to us when we questioned him at the NHS speech yesterday. So for now, she has referred herself to that government independent advisor for ethics and standards, and so for now we are waiting to see the outcome of that before the Prime Minister makes any decisions on Tulip Sadiq's future.
Great stuff, thank you, Natasha. Natasha Clarke there, live from Stratford in East London, where Keir Starmer has been making his AI speech. If you have been affected by any of the issues that we've spoken about today, don't forget the Samaritans, a charity you can call anytime, 24/7, that supports anybody who's struggling with issues such as mental health or some of the other things that have popped up today. The number is 116123. It's free of charge, day and night. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.